Welcome. I'm Bill Wake. I'm here to summarize the work we've been doing on Twitch this week. We did three basic things this week. The first is we made our join expressions show the renamed table name. So when you rename a table, it should rename where it shows up as a join. The second is we updated the table's reference map so that when the table's name changes, the rename shows up everywhere it should. And then lastly, we analyzed the rename. We want to warn if it's empty or if it's a duplicate. To understand the structures we're looking at, let's start with the table selection. So table selection knows the metadata, which is table and column names. It knows the renamed table name. That's the new feature we've been adding this lately. And then it also knows the table and column selections. So are they used or not used? And then finally, it has an ID, which is a table reference, which is basically a UUID, unique ID. The focus for the renamed joins is the scoped column, which is the thing that lets you say like class.id, the table name followed by the column name. And so it knows the selection ID of the table it's working with. It knows the original table and column names. I'm not sure it needs the original, but we'll see about that in the future. And then finally, if you give it a table reference map, it can get the description for that thing. So the table reference map is the thing that tracks the table selections as they change, so it knows the renamed name. And it's just a map from table reference to table selection. So computing the description requires it to look up in the table reference map, get the table selection ID it gives you, and then use the renamed name to give the name of the join. Here's the configure database screen. So when you look at this, you've got the class with the ability to rename it, and then we have the joins down here. So let's put in a join, and I think we'll take the case of an instructor for a class matching the person ID. So class.instructorFK equals person.id. All right. And these reflect the join that we're making here. Okay. Now you might say person's not really the right thing for this case. It might be better if it were instructor. And if I spelled it right. Okay, so if this were instructor, then we're saying class instructor FK equals instructor ID. And notice the join changed when I changed the table name up here. All right, let's see that in code. So here's the table selection. It's got an ID. It's got metadata, which is the name, the table name and the columns from the database. It's got the renamed name, which is the name we're calling it in our system. And then it's got selection. Do you include a table? Do you include which columns? And that's used by scoped column. The real thing is the description. So, well, it tracks that table ID, the table name, the column name, but then the real work is in the description. You give it the map, it looks up the table ID and then takes the renamed table and uses that to format the name. Now this relies on the table reference map being updated when it needs to be, and that happens in one table view. So when we want to change the table name, well, that's this text field here, the database view rename table, and we see table selection.rename table. It's passed in as a binding because it's a changeable field, a changeable value. All right, and that takes care of the editing part of things, but we added this too, this on change. If that renamed table names, we're going to make sure that the map updates. Now, I'm not quite sure we're doing things the best possible way. We've used the value objects, which are structs in Swift. That is nice because it makes the Swift UI framework detects all those updates and changes and takes care of it. I added this because I don't think, if we statically had a reference to this table somewhere, well, that's a value object. It's independent of another reference. So to make the same table show up in, to make both of them point to the same table mapping, we use this map table and pass it around. I don't 100% know if it has to be done that way. I think we're going to do a little more work and then track through and see if we can improve things. One case might be to make that table mapping, make it be a class and deal with the rest of it in those terms. I don't know. We'll see what has to happen there. Finally, let's look at the renamed analysis. it produces a message if it's either an empty name, if a name is empty, or if a name is a duplicate. So we start by building a list of the names. This is the renamed names. And if that has any empty names in it, any of those contain empty, then we format a message. If there are any duplicates in the list of names, then we format a message for that. Otherwise, if there are no problems, we just return an empty string for the message. An empty name, it's boring. It just has nothing in it. We can't really tell you what to look at. Instead, we go back to the original table name. So we filter out only the tables that are have empty renames, and then map them back and sort them. And that gives us a list of names that are empty. So let's just take an example here. The following tables have been renamed to an empty name class. Okay. It might be nice to highlight that somehow. We'll take that for a future thing. But once you have those list of names, we can join them with a list of commas and put them in the error message. So it's localized. We could change that pretty easily. The second group is that duplicates. And the way we're detecting duplicates is we're saying you've got a list of names. Let's make a set of them. If any of those names are duplicates, the set will be smaller than the original list because two things map to the same one. So we'll know it's got a duplicate in it. And then to find them, we do a dictionary grouping. So we're going to take those names, group them as at $0 is just the name itself. And then we're going to find those that have more than one thing in the list. So if you have class, person, the class will be in a list of 2. So we're going to only take the ones that have a list of more than one. And then we'll map that back to the key, which is the table name. And we'll get that sorted list and put them in an error message. So if we call this instructor, these tables have duplicate names, instructor. Okay. It was a short week, and I think some of these things took a while to get in place. So I think the big one was the table reference map. It comes from about 4 levels up. So we had to kind of pass that along through. I think, again, there may be a way to do that better if we can pass it as an environment variable that kind of automatically passes down through views. It was a bit of a challenge to get them all kind of focused through. So yeah, a day short and a lot of work doing mechanical stuff to get that thing moved around and find some other things. And then the second thing was once we got this description done, it wasn't quite working right. Things were not being sorted correctly. And the reason was basically the table reference map, we weren't getting the right one in. And so it was ignoring the table names and just sorting by the field names. And that meant we had to do this thing to kind of do some updates to the table to make sure that everybody was looking at the same object. All right. Well, thanks for listening. We meet Monday through Thursday, 2 to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time or 7 to 9:30 p.m. UTC. The easy way to get there is xp123.com/Twitch. All right. Thanks for joining me in this summary.